It was a quiet afternoon in the city, the kind where the sun poured gently through the tall cafe windows and painted the walls with soft, golden light. The streets outside were busy, filled with people rushing to work, meetings, or errands. But inside the small cafe there was a peaceful calm, broken only by the soft clinking of cups and the occasional laughter of friends catching up. She walked in carrying a worn-out tote bag and a mind full of unfinished thoughts. The day had been long, stressful, and ordinary, the kind of day where everything feels heavy even though nothing really went wrong. She wanted a little escape, a place where she could breathe for a while. The cafe smelled of roasted coffee beans and warm pastries, a smell that always made her feel a little safer, a little lighter. She glanced around the room, searching for a spot to settle down. That's when she noticed him. He was sitting in the far corner, at a piano tucked neatly against the wall, almost blending into the background. He looked ordinary at first glance, simple clothes, a quiet presence, nothing flashy. But there was something about him, something that made her pause. Maybe it was the way he moved his fingers lightly over the keys, or the way his eyes seemed focused on something invisible, something far away. Curiosity pulled her closer. She found herself walking toward him without even thinking. The piano music was soft, delicate, a gentle melody that filled the space without being overpowering. It wasn't something she recognized, but it felt familiar in a strange way, like a memory she couldn't place. Her steps slowed as she reached the edge of his table. "Hey," she said lightly, trying to break the quiet. "Play for me." "And I'll marry you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, playful and half-joking. She didn't really expect him to respond, and certainly not in any serious way. It was just a silly thing to say, a little fun to brighten her dull afternoon. He looked up at her, and for a moment she saw a flicker of amusement in his eyes. He didn't laugh or roll his eyes. He didn't even respond with words. Instead, he gave a small, polite smile as if acknowledging her challenge, and then turned back to the piano. She expected something ordinary, maybe a simple tune, a few random notes to humor her. But what came next was nothing like she imagined. His fingers moved across the keys with such precision and ease. It was almost like watching someone breathe. The notes flowed seamlessly, weaving a melody that was rich, powerful, and full of emotion. It wasn't loud or flashy, but every note seemed to reach her, touching something deep inside. She felt her heart slow, her breath catch, and her eyes widen slightly in surprise. People around the cafe began to notice too. Conversations died down. Forks paused midair. Even the barista behind the counter seemed to stop what she was doing, listening. The music filled the room, wrapping around everyone like a warm, invisible blanket. She couldn't believe it. The man she had teased with a joking challenge was playing with the skill of someone who had spent a lifetime perfecting their art. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful. She leaned in closer, drawn to the beauty of it, the unexpected depth. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the piano and the occasional sigh of someone lost in the music. She watched him, noticing small details, the gentle way he pressed the keys, the way his eyes closed for a brief moment as if feeling each note deeply. He wasn't performing for anyone. He wasn't showing off. He was simply letting the music come through him, natural and effortless. When the last note lingered and faded into silence, she felt a strange mix of awe and disbelief. She blinked, almost afraid to break the moment. Around them, people murmured softly, some even clapping quietly, but it all seemed distant to her. All she could focus on was him. He looked up again, meeting her eyes with that same calm, polite smile. There was no arrogance, no need for recognition, just a quiet confidence that made her even more intrigued. She wanted to say something, but words felt too small, too ordinary for what she had just experienced. Instead, she just smiled back, slightly embarrassed that she had ever made a joke about marriage. How could she have known that the man at the piano was capable of creating something so extraordinary? Something that could make the world outside feel far away for just a few minutes? She sat down at a nearby table, unable to tear her eyes away. Her coffee sat forgotten, steam curling in the air, untouched. She felt a strange curiosity about him, a desire to know more. Who was he? How did he play like that? And why did it feel like, even for a few minutes, the world had shifted because of him? He continued to play, not just for her, but for anyone who cared to listen. But it almost felt personal, like each note was meant to speak to her in a way words never could. She noticed that even the smallest sounds, the tapping of the keys, the subtle changes in rhythm seemed to tell a story. A story she didn't yet understand but wanted desperately to dot as the music played on. She found herself imagining him in different places, on a stage in front of thousands, playing for an audience that hung on his every note. She could see the way his hands moved, the way he seemed to become one with the piano. And she wondered how someone could be both so ordinary and so extraordinary at the same time. When the music finally paused for a short break, she gathered her courage. She walked over, trying to act casual, though her heart was beating faster than she could remember. You're really good," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. He nodded, a small, almost shy acknowledgement. "Thank you," he replied softly, without any hint of pride. I didn't expect that," she continued, feeling a little awkward. "I thought it would be just a few notes. Something fun." She laughed nervously. "I didn't know you could play like that." He smiled again, a faint, gentle curve of his lips, and said nothing more. The silence that followed was comfortable, not awkward. She realized she could sit there and listen to him play forever and still feel like she hadn't heard enough. Minutes passed, and the cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm. People resumed their conversations, baristas moved behind the counter, and the clatter of cups and saucers filled the air once again. But she remained at her table, her mind replaying every note, every pause, every subtle emotion that had come through the music. It was strange. She thought how someone so quiet, so seemingly ordinary, could make such an extraordinary impact. There was a mystery to him, something hidden just beneath the surface, and she felt a pull to uncover it. She wanted to know his story, his life, the journey that led him here. Playing piano in a quiet cafe on an ordinary afternoon. She sipped her coffee finally, letting the warmth seep into her hands, and watched him from across the room. There was a simplicity about him, a calmness that contrasted with the brilliance of his playing. She couldn't stop thinking about how little she really knew about the people around her, and how sometimes the most extraordinary things were hiding in the most ordinary places. And in that quiet moment she realized something else too. That little joke she had thrown out, the one about marriage, was no longer just a joke. Not because she meant it literally, but because she had glimpsed something in him that felt rare and impossible to ignore. Something genuine, something brilliant, something that made her heart skip in a way she hadn't expected. She didn't know it yet, but this encounter was only the beginning. The ordinary cafe, the warm sunlight, the soft clink of cups, it would all become a memory she cherished forever. The day she met someone extraordinary without even realizing it at first. And as he continued to play, lost in his music, she sat there quietly, her thoughts a mixture of wonder, curiosity, and a strange kind of hope. She had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she could never imagine, all starting with a simple challenge. Play for me and I'll marry you. The next few days were a blur for her. She found herself thinking about him constantly, about the quiet man at the piano whose fingers seemed to dance across the keys as if they had a life of their own. Every time she sipped her coffee, she imagined the melodies he had played, and the way his calm presence had made the busy cafe feel like a private world just for her. She wasn't sure why he had captured her attention so completely. There was no dramatic flair, no obvious charm. He didn't speak much, and he certainly didn't demand notice. Yet there was something magnetic about him, something that made ordinary days feel different, even special. She had never believed in fate or signs, but for some reason, she couldn't shake the feeling that meeting him was important. More than just a coincidence. One afternoon, she found herself back at the same cafe. She didn't know if he would be there, but there was a pull she couldn't resist. As she entered, the smell of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries filled the air, comforting and familiar. Her eyes immediately scanned the room, and as if the universe had answered her unspoken wish, he was there. Sitting at the piano, his fingers resting lightly on the keys, Waiting, their eyes met for a brief moment, and he gave her the same polite, gentle smile that had fascinated her before. He didn't say anything, but somehow she felt an unspoken acknowledgement, a quiet connection that needed no words. She took a seat at a nearby table, her heart a little lighter just by seeing him. He began to play again, and this time she felt herself drawn even deeper into the music. It wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. The melody seemed to tell a story of quiet nights, fleeting moments of joy, longing, and hope. She felt emotions rise in her chest, a strange mixture of happiness and sadness, excitement and calm all at once. Each note reached into her soul, touching places she didn't know existed. She noticed something new this time. As he played, he occasionally glanced around the cafe, but his eyes seemed to see everything without looking directly. He noticed the small things, the way a couple laughed at the corner table, the way a young man nervously tapped his foot as he waited for someone, the subtle movements of the barista as she served drinks. It was as if the music was not only about him but about everyone in the room, connecting them all in a way she couldn't explain. She couldn't help but be mesmerized. For the first time she felt a real desire to understand him, to know what made him so extraordinary yet so ordinary at the same time. She wondered about his life, his story, and the journey that had brought him here. Playing piano in a small cafe in the middle of the city, after a while, the cafe began to fill with more customers. People who hadn't noticed him before started to stop and listen. Some even whispered to each other, amazed at the skill and emotion pouring from the piano. Yet, despite the growing audience, he didn't change. He didn't play for attention or applause. He played because he had to, because the music lived inside him and needed to be heard. She felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. It wasn't just admiration or fascination. It was something deeper, something that made her feel connected not only to him but to the music itself. She realized that she was experiencing a moment of pure, unspoken understanding, the kind that rarely comes in life after a long pause in the music. He looked at her briefly, his eyes holding a quiet invitation. Without thinking, she walked over to the piano, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "That was incredible," she said softly, almost breathless. "I don't even know how to describe it. It's like the music knows everything I'm feeling." He nodded slightly, his expression calm, yet she noticed a hint of something more, a warmth, a subtle pride but never arrogance. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I just play what I feel. It comes naturally." She smiled, trying to match his calmness, though her heart was still racing. "Naturally? That's not fair," she said playfully. "Some of us can barely play a few notes without hitting the wrong keys. And here you are, making it sound like it's the easiest thing in the world." He laughed softly, a sound so quiet it was almost like a whisper, but it made her smile widen. There was no pretension in him, no desire to show off or impress. He was simply himself, letting the music speak for him in a way words never could. Over the next few weeks, she found herself returning to the cafe more often. Sometimes she came intentionally, hoping to see him again. Other times it was by chance, a quiet habit forming without her realizing it. Each time she discovered something new about him. The way he focused on the piano, the subtle expressions that crossed his face when he played something particularly challenging, and the occasional, almost shy glance when he noticed her watching. She started to notice little patterns, small quirks that made him human, approachable, and incredibly real. He would hum softly to himself when practicing a new melody, tap his foot in rhythm when no one was looking, and occasionally pause to write down a note or a thought in a small notebook he always kept nearby. These little glimpses of his life fascinated her, and she couldn't help but feel a growing admiration for him, not just for his talent, but for his humility, his quiet dedication, and his genuine love for what he did. One rainy afternoon, the cafe was nearly empty. The sound of raindrops tapping against the windows created a gentle rhythm that mixed with the soft hum of the heater. She walked in, shaking off her umbrella, and saw him at the piano, playing something slower this time, more reflective. The music was soft, almost like a whisper, yet it carried a depth that made her heart ache in the best possible way. She sat at her usual table, letting the music wash over her. It wasn't just a melody anymore. It was a conversation, a story unfolding between the notes. She imagined the places he might have been, the experiences that shaped him, and the quiet moments of life that inspired such beauty. She realized that every note held a piece of him, and listening was like glimpsing his soul without words. As the piece ended, she felt a sudden impulse to speak, to express something she couldn't quite put into words. She walked over and sat on the piano bench next to him. "Do you ever get tired of playing?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, slightly surprised by the question, then shook his head. "Never," he replied. "It's not about the playing. It's about sharing. Even if no one listens, it still matters. It still exists. Music is life. It's how I understand the world." She nodded slowly, thinking about how rare it was to meet someone who lived so fully in their passion. "It's beautiful," she said. "You make it feel possible, like anything can be beautiful if you notice it." He smiled, that quiet, gentle smile that made her chest tighten for reasons she didn't understand. "Thank you. That means more than you know." From that moment, something shifted. Their connection was no longer just about curiosity or admiration. It was something quieter, something deeper. She felt a sense of trust, a feeling that she could see him as he really was. Beyond the music, beyond the piano, beyond the brief moments in the cafe, she didn't know much about him yet. But she was beginning to feel like she wanted to. She wanted to know his story, his past, the dreams he carried, the small worries that didn't appear in his music. And somehow, she felt that he wanted to know her as well. Not in words, not in rushed conversation, but in the quiet understanding that existed when two people shared a space, a moment, and a feeling that didn't need to be explained. The afternoons continued in the same rhythm. She would arrive and he would play. She would listen, sometimes speaking, sometimes sitting in silence. Each day revealed a little more his passion, his humility, his brilliance hidden behind a calm, ordinary exterior. She began to realize that the man at the piano was extraordinary in ways that went far beyond talent. He had a presence that made the world feel lighter, more meaningful, more connected, and yet, despite all of this, he remained a mystery. He never spoke about his life outside the cafe. He never mentioned where he had learned to play or whether he performed anywhere else. For her, the mystery was part of the attraction. It made every moment feel like a secret gift, every melody a message meant just for her. One day, as he played a particularly tender piece, she noticed a small smile cross his face, almost hidden, almost shy. It was as if he was sharing something with her, something personal, something that went beyond the music itself. She felt her heart swell, a quiet understanding passing between them that didn't require words. In that moment, she realized that this was no longer just fascination or admiration. It was something deeper, something that could grow into something real. And though she didn't know where it would lead, she felt certain that this was the beginning of a story neither of them could have anticipated, a story that started with a simple challenge, a playful joke, and a piano in a quiet cafe. Days turned into weeks, and the city moved around them as if nothing had changed. Yet for her, everything felt different. Each visit to the cafe brought a sense of anticipation she couldn't ignore. She didn't just want coffee or a quiet corner anymore. She wanted to see him, to hear him play, to catch even the smallest glimpse of the world he seemed to carry inside him. It started with little details she couldn't explain. One afternoon, she noticed the way his fingers danced over the piano keys, effortless, fluid, precise, like water flowing over rocks. She had seen talented pianists before, but there was something about him that felt alive, something that made the music feel like it had a heartbeat. She leaned closer, watching the subtle movements of his hands, the slight tilt of his head, the way his eyes softened when a particularly delicate note lingered in the air. She began paying attention to other things too. How he listened, not just to the music, but to the world around him. A street musician outside, the faint hum of traffic, the quiet conversations at neighboring tables, all of it seemed to weave into his playing. She realized that the music wasn't just coming from him. It was coming through him from a place she didn't yet understand. Curiosity gnawed at her. Who was he really? She had asked him questions, small, safe ones, and he always answered with gentle honesty, but never revealed anything about himself that seemed personal. No stories, no explanations, no hints of a life outside the cafe. And yet she sensed there was more, something extraordinary hidden beneath his calm exterior. One rainy evening, she arrived at the cafe to find him already at the piano, his coat hanging neatly on the chair behind him, a notebook beside him. The rain tapped steadily against the windows, creating a quiet rhythm that matched the soft hum of the heater. She settled at her usual table, watching as he flipped through his notebook, jotting down small notes and melodies. Something made her lean closer this time, a quiet need to understand him better. She noticed the careful way he adjusted his fingers on the keys, the faint hum as he tested a few chords, the tiny smile when a sequence of notes felt right. It was clear that he wasn't just playing for practice, he was composing, creating and living in the music all at once. She couldn't stop herself from asking, "Do you play anywhere else? Outside the cafe?" Her voice was tentative, almost hesitant. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, calm and gentle as always. "Sometimes," he said softly, "but not often. I prefer places like this, where people can listen quietly, without expectations." Her curiosity deepened. The way he said it made her think there was more he wasn't saying, more that he was holding back. She wanted to ask, but the words felt too big for the quiet cafe, too loud for the music that seemed to surround them. Over the next few days, she started noticing other small signs that suggested there was more to him than met the eye. She overheard a brief conversation between two people in a music store, talking about a pianist who had just returned from performing in another country, praised by critics and fans alike. She didn't pay much attention at first. It could have been anyone. But a name slipped through, a name she would have recognized if she knew it. Her heart skipped, but she pushed the thought aside, unsure if she was imagining things. Still, the hints kept coming. A magazine left on a cafe table had a small article about a legendary pianist performing at a local event, accompanied by a photo that made her stop mid-bite. She couldn't believe it. Could it be him? But it didn't make sense. He had never mentioned anything, never hinted at fame, never behaved like someone who had the world watching their every move. One evening, while she was walking home, she noticed a poster for a charity concert featuring a pianist who had traveled internationally, a name printed in bold letters. Her heart raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was him, the man who sat quietly in the corner of the cafe, so unassuming that no one would guess his talent. She tried to convince herself it was a coincidence, that maybe she was reading too much into it. But a small, stubborn voice inside her whispered that it wasn't a coincidence. The next day, she arrived at the cafe early, unable to wait for confirmation. She watched him from across the room, his fingers gliding over the keys in a melody that seemed softer, more intimate than usual. She realized she didn't just want to know if he was famous, she wanted to know him. The real him, behind the piano, behind the quiet smile, behind the music that seemed to carry everything he didn't say. He noticed her watching and gave a small, polite nod. She felt a flutter in her chest, a strange mix of excitement and fear. What would she say if she asked him directly? Would it change everything between them if she discovered the truth? Days passed, and the tension between curiosity and caution grew. She found herself imagining conversations, rehearsing questions in her mind, wondering how she could approach the subject without breaking the quiet connection they had built. Every time he played, every time she watched him, her curiosity deepened, her admiration growing into something more than she had expected. Then, one afternoon, it happened. She arrived at the cafe just as he was packing up his notebook, a quiet smile on his face as he prepared to leave. She couldn't contain herself any longer. "I have to ask," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you more than just a cafe pianist?" He looked at her, his expression calm but unreadable. There was a moment of silence, a pause that made her heart pound. Then he leaned back slightly, his fingers brushing the edge of the piano keys. "Why do you ask?" He said softly, his voice even and gentle. She hesitated, unsure how to explain the strange mix of curiosity and certainty she felt. I don't know, I feel like there's more to you. Something extraordinary. The way you play. The way you connect with the music. It's not something ordinary. For the first time, she saw a flicker of emotion cross his face, surprise, maybe even amusement. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed his notebook and looked down at the keys as if measuring how much to reveal. You're perceptive, he said finally. More perceptive than most people. She felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with fear. Her mind raced. Did this mean she was close to discovering the truth? Or was he simply acknowledging her insight without giving anything away? He stood up slowly, gathering his things, and for a brief moment she thought he might leave without answering. But then he turned toward her, a quiet intensity in his gaze. There's more to me than what you see here, he said softly. But it's not something I share lightly. Music, it's my life, my voice, my world, and only those who truly listen can understand it. Her heart sank and soared at the same time. She didn't have a full answer, but she felt closer than ever to the truth. She realized that his world was bigger than she had imagined, deeper, more complicated, and infinitely more fascinating. And she wanted to be a part of it, not just as a spectator, but as someone who understood him, who saw him beyond the piano and the quiet smile. Over the next few weeks, she started paying closer attention to small details, clues he didn't realize he was giving away. The way his hands moved with practiced ease. The way he sometimes hummed melodies she didn't recognize. The tiny notebook where he wrote things down carefully, methodically. Almost like a secret diary of his music. One afternoon, a chance encounter brought the truth closer than ever. She overheard a conversation at a music studio across the street, where two musicians were discussing a pianist who had recently returned from performing internationally. One of them mentioned the cafe, joking about the quiet genius who played there, and that was all it took. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned away quickly, afraid they had noticed her eavesdropping, but the pieces clicked in her mind. The man at the cafe, the one who played with effortless beauty, the one who seemed ordinary, was a legendary pianist. Her mind raced. How could she have missed it? How could someone so famous, so talented, appear so quiet, so humble, so ordinary, and yet there was no denying it. Every note he had played, every subtle movement, every quiet gesture, all of it pointed to someone extraordinary. That evening, she returned to the cafe, her thoughts tangled with excitement and disbelief. He was there, as usual, playing softly, a melody that seemed to echo the questions and realizations swirling in her mind. She sat at her table, trying to calm her racing heart. She wanted to ask him directly, to confront the truth, but she also wanted to savor the moment, to watch him play, to feel the music and the man behind it. As she listened, she realized something important. The truth didn't matter as much as she had feared. Whether he was famous or not, the connection they shared, the quiet understanding, the shared moments of music, the fascination and curiosity was real. She didn't need the world to know his identity. She only needed to feel the music, to feel the man who had touched her heart without even trying. And in that moment, she knew that this was just the beginning. The beginning of understanding him, of discovering his world, and of finding her place within it. The journey was far from over, and she couldn't wait to see where it would lead. Time seemed to slow whenever she was around him. The city carried on with its usual noise and hurry, but inside the cafe, or even just near him, the world felt different. Easier, softer, and yet more alive at the same time. She realized she was no longer just fascinated by his music or curious about his life. She cared about him. She cared about the quiet moments, the laughter that escaped him unexpectedly, and the small gestures that revealed his kindness. It started with small conversations. She learned about the simple joys he loved, the little things that made him smile, the way sunlight fell across the quays in the morning, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery next door, the quiet rhythm of rain against the window. He spoke slowly, thoughtfully, like each word was measured, and yet every word revealed something honest, something real. She found herself sharing little things too, her thoughts about books she read, her day-to-day struggles and small hopes she didn't usually voice to anyone. One afternoon, he invited her to stay after the cafe closed. "I want to show you something," he said quietly, his calm tone making her heart beat a little faster. He led her to the piano, sitting beside her in a way that felt natural, unhurried. For the first time, she felt like they were in a world of their own. A private space where the noise of life didn't matter. He played again. But this time, it wasn't just music, it was a conversation. Each note seemed to speak directly to her, telling stories without words, expressing feelings she couldn't name. She realized that the music was more than a talent. It was a language, and he was speaking to her in a way she understood without trying. When the music stopped, she stayed silent for a moment, not wanting to break the spell. Then she finally said, "It's amazing. You make it feel like the music knows me." He looked at her, a gentle smile touching his lips. "Maybe it does," he said softly. "Music knows more about us than we sometimes know ourselves." She laughed quietly, a little embarrassed. "You make it sound so simple, but it isn't. It's beautiful." From that day on, their meetings grew longer, less about music and more about connection. They walked together through quiet streets after the cafe closed, sipping coffee from take-out cups, sharing stories, jokes, and moments that felt intimate without being forced. She began noticing the little things about him, how he would pause to help someone struggling with a door, the way he listened intently when she spoke, and the careful thought he gave to every action. One chilly evening, they found themselves sitting on a bench outside the cafe, watching the city lights reflect in puddles from a recent rain. She shivered slightly and he offered her his coat. "It's colder than it looks," he said softly. She accepted it with a smile, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the coat. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, and even their fears. She was surprised by how open he was, how gently he shared pieces of himself she hadn't expected to hear. He told her about small failures, moments of doubt, and times he had felt alone despite being surrounded by people. And yet, he never sought sympathy. He simply shared, as if letting her glimpse his life without any expectation in return. She realized that he wasn't just extraordinary at the piano, he was extraordinary in life. There was a calm strength in him, a kindness that seemed effortless, and a humility that made her admiration deepen into something much more personal. She felt a pull toward him, a desire to be close, not just because of his talent, but because of who he was, genuine, thoughtful, and unexpectedly human. One afternoon, while sitting in the cafe, he surprised her. "Do you want to try something?" he asked, a quiet enthusiasm in his voice. She raised her eyebrows. "Try what?" He led her to the piano, placing her hands gently on the keys. "I'll play, and you follow along. Don't worry about mistakes, just feel it." She hesitated at first, nervous and self-conscious. But as he played, she felt the music guiding her fingers, the rhythm making her forget her own doubts. It was not perfect, not by any means, but it was alive. And when she looked at him, she saw the quiet encouragement in his eyes. The way he smiled at her without a word. They laughed together at the mistakes, shared quiet satisfaction at the moments that worked. And gradually she realized she was learning more than music. She was learning to trust herself, to take small risks, and to feel joy in imperfection. And in doing so, she was learning more about him too, how he nurtured, encouraged, and cared without demanding attention or praise. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. They began sharing more personal experiences outside the cafe, walks through parks, quiet evenings by the river, visits to small art galleries, and even impromptu picnics where the city felt miles away. She noticed how he observed the world differently, noticing beauty in details she might have overlooked. And in return, he seemed interested in her world, her thoughts, her feelings. One rainy afternoon, they sat together under an awning, watching the raindrops trace patterns on the pavement. She leaned slightly toward him, feeling a comfort she hadn't expected. "I feel like I know you," she said softly, "but at the same time, I feel like there's so much I don't know." He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "There is," he said quietly. "There's always more to a person than what we see." but I want you to know the parts I can share. I want you to see the world I see, if you want to." She felt her heart swell. It wasn't just his words. It was the honesty behind them, the trust he offered without pressure, the invitation to step into his life gently, without expectation or judgment. She realized that their connection wasn't just about music anymore. It was about understanding each other, building trust and sharing moments that mattered. Over time, she noticed even more about his character, the patience he showed with strangers, the quiet humor that appeared when he thought no one was watching, and the way he treated every small gesture with importance. He was careful with words, deliberate in action, and yet spontaneous in thought and creativity. She felt drawn to this side of him, the human side, more than the musician everyone else might one day see. One evening, as the sun set and the café grew quiet, he asked her to sit beside him at the piano. "I want to play something for you," he said softly. She agreed, curious and eager. He played a piece unlike any she had heard before, soft, tender, and full of emotion. Each note seemed to hold a message, a feeling he couldn't quite put into words, and she listened entranced. When the final note faded, she didn't speak immediately. Her eyes were wet, though she wasn't sad. She was moved, deeply and unexpectedly. That was beautiful," she finally whispered. "It felt personal, like it was meant just for me." He smiled gently, the kind of smile that made her chest tighten. "It was," he said softly. "Every melody I play carries a part of me. Some I share with the world, some I save for moments like this." She realized that she had become part of his world in a quiet, significant way. It wasn't about fame, recognition, or talent anymore. It was about connection, trust, and shared understanding. She didn't know what the future held, but she felt certain that this bond, fragile and precious, was something worth cherishing. They continued to spend time together, learning about each other's worlds. She showed him small joys she loved, books, walks, quiet cafes, the feeling of sunlight on her face, and he, in turn, shared his music, his observations, and his moments of quiet reflection. Slowly, naturally, their friendship deepened, building a foundation that was strong and real, untouched by the outside world's judgments. She often thought about how extraordinary he was, not just as a musician, but as a human being. There was a depth, a quiet strength, and a sincerity that made her want to know him fully. And yet, he remained humble, never demanding attention, never seeking validation. He was extraordinary, but not in a way that overshadowed the world around him. He made it better, brighter, and more alive simply by being himself. And in all these moments, shared walks, quiet conversations, laughter, music, and silence, she realized something powerful. This wasn't just admiration or curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something real, something that had grown quietly, naturally, like a seed taking root and slowly blossoming into something beautiful. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she felt ready to face it, ready to continue discovering him, ready to see where this connection might lead. And as she watched him play that evening, sunlight catching the edges of his fingers on the piano keys, she knew that whatever the future held, this bond built on music, understanding, and quiet trust was something rare, something precious, something worth holding on to. The cafe was quiet that afternoon, bathed in the soft golden light of late afternoon. It was the same cafe where it all began, where she had first made her playful joke, "Play for me, and I'll marry you," without knowing the extraordinary man who would change her life. Now, weeks later, everything had shifted. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and the music that once filled the air had become a language that spoke directly to her heart. She arrived early, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Today felt different, important. She didn't know why exactly, but there was a sense of anticipation she couldn't ignore. The streets outside buzzed with the usual city noise, but inside the cafe, the world seemed to slow, as if it had been waiting for this moment. He was already at the piano. His coat hung neatly behind him, a notebook beside him, and his fingers resting lightly on the keys. He looked up as she entered, giving her that quiet, gentle smile that always made her chest tighten. "You're early," he said softly, a hint of amusement in his calm voice. I wanted to be here, she replied, trying to sound casual, though her heart raced. She took her usual seat, her eyes fixed on him, on the piano, on the small movements that made him so human, so alive. He began to play, and immediately she felt the familiar pull of the music. But today it was different. There was a warmth, a tenderness, a personal quality that seemed meant only for her. Each note carried a story, a memory, a message she couldn't fully name but felt deeply. She leaned forward slightly, letting the melody wash over her, feeling as if she could understand him through the music itself. When the piece ended, he looked at her, his eyes holding a quiet invitation. Sit with me, he said, gesturing to the bench beside him. Her heart skipped, and she moved without hesitation, sitting next to him, close enough to feel the warmth of his presence. I have something for you, he said softly, reaching for the notebook beside him. She looked down curiously as he opened it, revealing a new piece of music. I wrote this for you, he explained. It's personal. Something I wanted you to hear first. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, but she didn't play. She listened. And as he began, the music unfolded like a story. It was gentle, delicate, yet full of depth and emotion. Each note seemed to speak directly to her, expressing feelings he couldn't put into words. There was joy, vulnerability, longing, and an intimacy that made her chest ache in the most wonderful way. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of connection, of understanding, of feeling something so real that it couldn't be contained. She realized, in that moment, that he was sharing not just music but a piece of himself, a part of his heart that he trusted her with. When the last note lingered in the air, fading into silence, she sat quietly for a moment, letting the experience settle around her. Then she turned to him, her voice soft but steady. It's beautiful. I can feel you in it, every part of you. He looked at her, a small, shy smile touching his lips. That's exactly what I wanted, he said quietly. I wanted you to know me without words, without explanations. Just, me. Her heart swelled. She had come to care for him deeply, not just because of his talent, but because of his kindness, his humility, his genuine nature. And now, in this moment, she realized how much he mattered to her. She wanted to tell him, to show him, to make sure he knew that their connection was real, meaningful, and something she didn't take lightly. Gathering her courage, she reached for his hand. He looked at her surprised, then smiled gently, letting her take it. I care about you, she said softly. More than I expected, more than I thought possible, and I want to be with you. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The distant hum of the city, the soft clinking of cups in the cafe, even the sunlight filtering through the windows, all of it faded into the background. It was just the two of them, connected in a quiet, profound way that words alone could never capture. He squeezed her hand gently, his eyes shining with emotion. I care about you too, he said softly. I have for a while, I just didn't know how to say it. But you've been here, truly listening, seeing me for who I am. That means everything. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief, joy, and love. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was calm, steady, and real. It was the kind of moment that stayed with you forever. Etched into memory not because of grand gestures, but because it was true, honest, and human. He stood up, moving to the piano again, and this time he gestured for her to come closer. I want to play something new, he said. Something we can share together. She sat beside him, their shoulders touching slightly, feeling a connection that went beyond words. As he played, she realized that this was more than music. It was a dialogue, a conversation between two hearts, a sharing of emotions and trust. She listened, completely absorbed, letting each note carry her deeper into the moment. When the final chord faded, he turned to her, his expression soft and open. I don't want this moment to end, he said quietly. I don't want us to go back to being separate like before. I want us together. Not just here, not just in music, but in life. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of happiness. She nodded, a small, joyful smile spreading across her face. Yes, she whispered. I want that too. I want us. He reached out and held her hand again, this time with a quiet certainty that made her heart leap. Then let's promise, he said softly, to be honest, to share, to support each other, and to face life together. No pretenses, no hiding, just... Yes, I promise, she said, feeling a weight lift from her chest. Replaced by a warmth she had never felt before, the cafe around them seemed to brighten, the golden light reflecting the quiet happiness between them. People came and went. The city continued its usual rhythm, but in that little space time felt suspended. It was just them, their connection, and the music that had brought them together over the next hours. They talked, laughed, and shared small, meaningful gestures, touches, glances, and soft smiles that spoke volumes. Every interaction felt significant, every moment a reminder that they had found something rare, a bond built on honesty, understanding, and mutual respect. As evening approached, the cafe emptied, leaving them in a quiet, intimate space. He played one last piece for her, gentle and personal, each note a reaffirmation of their connection. She listened, feeling the music wrap around her like a warm embrace, a promise of what was to come. When the final note lingered and faded, she turned to him, her eyes bright with emotion. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. For the music, for your trust, for... You, he smiled, his hand brushing hers again. No, he said quietly, thank you. For seeing me, for listening, for being here. That's the greatest gift anyone could give? For a long moment they sat in silence, simply holding hands, sharing the quiet understanding that words could not fully capture. And in that moment she realized that life had a way of surprising you, that sometimes the most extraordinary things could be found in ordinary places, a small cafe, a piano, and a man who played not for fame or attention, but for the love of music and connection. As they stood to leave, he looked at her, his expression soft and steady. Wherever life takes us, he said, I want to face it with you. I don't care about fame, about recognition, about anything else. I just want... Yes? Her heart swelled, and she nodded, feeling a joy so full it almost hurt. And I want that too, she said. I want us, no matter what. They walked out of the cafe together, stepping into the evening air, hand in hand, hearts connected in a way that went beyond music, beyond words, beyond ordinary life. It was the beginning of something real, something lasting, something beautiful. And though no one outside knew the story that had unfolded, the quiet promise, the shared music, and the honest connection between them would forever change their lives. The cafe, the piano, and the playful challenge that had started it all, play for me, and I'll marry you, had led to something far greater than either of them had imagined. Love, trust, and a bond that would endure, built on the music of their hearts. It wasn't a story of grandeur or spectacle. It was a story of humanity, of connection, of understanding, and of love that grew quietly, steadily, and beautifully. And as they walked through the city, hand in hand, she knew that this was only the beginning of a life filled with music, laughter, and the quiet joy of being truly seen.